Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore, where the crew and I have gotten back together, and this is my birthday episode. So I thank you both for showing up for this enticing film and feature discussion. It starts out the month of what looks like slasher month, correct?
Yep, July is going to be slasher summer.
Okay.
So we're going to be talking about your favorite slasher films and probably your least favorite slasher films throughout the month of July.
Nice. So, the title of this film is, in fact, called Mr. Sardonicus, and it was filmed in 1961 and directed by William Castle, who definitely was an interesting character. First as a director, it's interesting how he looked up to Orson Welles as a director, and this is the way the cookie crumbled for him. So let me start out with a small segment on what this movie is about. So, a search for a winning lottery ticket in his dead father's grave causes Sardonicus' face to freeze in a horrible grimace until he forces a doctor to treat his infection with even more grotesque results. The audience gets an opportunity to vote via the punishment poll for the penalty Sardonicus must pay for his deeds. So, Brandon, was this your first watch for Mr. Sardonicus?
Though it has not been my first, what do they call it? Though not my first exposure to Castle, it is my first watch, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've never seen Mr. Sardonicus before, but I have actually been looking forward to seeing this because I do enjoy his work. So this was a pleasant surprise. I felt like the pace was awesome, and overall, it was a good film. Good feeling film.
Okay. Moving over to Jake. Was this your first time watching this film, or was it was it a film that you had actually seen before?
Well, this was definitely a first time for me as well. I honestly am not 100% sure I'd ever heard of the film before it was suggested for this particular thing, and I'm not particularly familiar with William Castle's films, or at least was not before this. Although I think I knew the name, it was. But I went in not entirely sure what to expect, and for the most part, I would say I was pleasantly surprised. It's pretty interesting.
Well, I was. I see. My mom used to run a resale shop, and I knew a guy who would collect VHS from time to time, and he would always tell me about these weird and obscure films or whatnot. And he was a weird guy himself, so it kind of came with the territory. But he told me about Mr. Sardonicus, and I had to check it out. So I for either my birthday or Christmas, I was given the William Castle collection, the 8-film DVD collection, and I watched it for the very first time, and I absolutely loved it, and I loved everything about it. It had the creep factor. It had the my name is Grally. I do that thing if I asked, I just love the characters involved in here, even though there were some moments where you could see there was some suggestive, but we'll get into those details as we go along. So the plot here is, well, like we said, it's where okay, a man in his younger days had a first wife, and he has to find this lottery ticket that had been buried with his father or something like that, and it's because of his wife's greed that forced him into this curse that is set upon his face, which has him wearing this mask. What do we think about Mr. Sardonicus as a character? Is he definitely
actually? It reminded me of, and it made me finally watch the movie, The Man Who Laughed.
Okay.
That's actually kind of an alternate way that character can turn out, because in that movie, though the disfiguration is horrifying, it is he is at his very nature a good person. Whereas with Mr. Sardonicus, he started in his nature as a good person, but allowed this to actually twist him. So it's kind of interesting to see those two stories kind of play out of each other. Of course, one was 1928, and I don't remember what this one was. Probably in what, the 60s or 50s, something like that.
61, wasn't it?
Yep,
Yeah.
61.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, what did you think of Baron Sardonicus?
Well, he definitely is a very controlling individual. And again, when he was known as Marek, he was actually he seemed like a decent guy. You don't really see much of him other than the fact that he and his father are really close, and that his wife's raving something or other. But then when he, as the Baron, he really doesn't get a lot of sympathy, I think. Or at least I didn't feel the need to give him any. Yeah.
As for me, I somewhat thought that he had a very domineering presence in the film. I mean, he's once you finally hear the story of the doctor's flame, and how she came to be his wife, per se, you get to hear a little bit. Evidently, that must have been something sympathizing that he might have done, because he took care of a debt by marrying her, or something to that effect, And but that being said, what do we think about the doctor's character?
The Sir Robert
Cargrave.
Well, he reminded me of the love child of Sean Astin and Detective Columbo. I don't know. He was an interesting character. Yeah.
See, to me, he kind of came across as one of those just standard hero type characters with a twist. I mean, they all have like something there, but it's amazing in a lot of the movies, especially in that time period where the heroic lead they all tend to kind of mesh together. At least to me, they do.
He kind of reminded me of Jonathan Harker from Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I kind of felt like the whole thing had a little bit of a Dracula vibe in a lot of ways.
Did
And,
kind
Mm-hmm.
of
yeah.
have that kind of a vibe, didn't it? Because
Right.
he was summoned to this
Mhm.
castle in what was at first I thought they said Bratislava, but it was something else, wasn't it? It was Gratislav, or it was some weird name that they said, and to me that's like Romanian to me. So
Yeah, in that general area.
yeah, because when okay,
Gorslava.
another thing that I thought that was interesting is that the doctor, when he was Dr. Robert Cargrave, when he was at his regular home, he had just gotten an instrument that was very new at this point in time, and it was called. Anyone know?
Hypodermic needle.
Yep. The
Yes.
hypodermic needle, which evidently at this point in time in film was evidently the newest instrument to known to science. So, and so that was something that I think played a part in his drama in the end. So, what do we think about the rest of the plot?
Well,
The
I
rest
think
of
that
the plot.
actually, I mean, the plot unfolds. I mean, yeah, the comparisons to Nosferatu actually do make a lot of sense. It really is, though, a just sort of a mystery as it unravels for you the all the motivations of Sardonicus, and of course, a lot of times just trying to figure out how is it that these heroes are going to, or the hero is going to escape and save everybody. But even then, it's just finding out what's really going on with this sinister being as it goes.
hmm
Okay, what do you think, Jake? How do you how do you feel the plot? Uh, how do you feel like the plot goes for you? Does does it go way out of bounds, or does it
No,
follow
no.
you know?
Like I said, it's a pretty straightforward in a lot of ways, and of course, one aspect that we haven't even really talked about yet, strangely enough, is the character of Kroll, who is sort of the Baron's manservant, and he's really he basically
Exhibits a form.
draws a lot of the plot along himself, and
Very true.
but basically you've got a lot of you've got the little bit of the Sir Robert had once been into the one who's now the Baroness, and so they've got a little bit of a thing going, and then you've got the little subplot about ghouls and that little speech that the Baron gives and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, like I said, it's not an overly complicated plot, but it's a fun one.
Well,
One thing, well, now I'll talk about that later when we do the more overall.
yeah.
But I will go ahead and say this: I thought Kroll was a fun character. He was super loyal. I mean, he basically said, I'll do anything the master tells me to do. Anything he tells me.
To do something, I do it.
Yes, that's what it. Yeah, He tells me to do it, I do it.
If the master tells me to do that thing, I'll do that thing.
Yes.
Mhm.
That
A little less Italian, but you know.
was
But yeah, it was kind of an interesting and of course he had that weird creepy eye thing that was is explained later on, but yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
you almost always have to have a character that does the master's bidding. He is kind of a Igorish like character,
Right.
like the Hunchback.
Mhm.
Except that this one really was not the way that a lot of people tend to think of that character. Yeah. He was much more competent, you know? It's
I think
almost like, well, because of that whole if the master tells me to do the thing, I do the thing. He was like very much like a jack of all trades, sort of it's very interesting. Yeah.
um, moving forward on that concept,
Mhm.
because Kroll definitely does move the film along because you see him at the very beginning when he sends the letter, and then you see him when the doctor gets off at where the Baron has his place, and there's a very interesting scene where he sees some kind of a bellhop or some carriage guy, and he's scared shitless for some reason, and that's when Kroll shows up, and and that's when he takes him back, and then of course you see him throwing leeches on this blonde servant.
Yeah. The old methods.
Mhm.
Have you
Yes.
heard of what shall I call it? A guinea pig?
Yes.
So he is definitely a character developing thing, and you almost can see him in his like own movie because he does carry his own character very well, and
Mhm.
that was he was in fact played by let me see here.
Oscar Homoka.
Correct. So I'm it's interesting because all of these characters are uh, Czechoslovakian almost, and this guy is he had a European accent, and he had a Slavic sounding name.
Mhm.
So Oscar Homoka. Although I'm not sure if he's related to the Ken and Barbie killers, but but
Well, yeah, IMDb says he was born in Vienna, so he's definitely in that general realm. Yeah.
so um, but yeah, so we have some other characters here that are going on his the doctor's old flame. I think her name is Anna.
The
Or is it
mod.
or is it Audrey Dalton who plays Baroness Maud Sardonicus?
Hmm.
What do we think of her character?
Oh. I really, oddly enough, don't have much to think about her character.
Yeah, she was kind of there.
I mean, she really was more the means to an end plot-wise than anything else. Maybe even a stand-in for his wife.
Okay.
Uh,
She was just and the director was like, "Okay, when I want you to speak and react, you react. Okay, okay, let's go."
I just felt her as more of that one. She was a useful device in the plot to get the hero to the setting, And then the other part was she also was a useful stand-in for the first wife of Mr. Sardonicus. Well, so really, in a way, it works out very well plot-wise.
Okay.
I mean, that's how it felt to me, anyway.
Okay. Me, well, I think there is kind of a romantic atmosphere where because you got kind of a sense that this doctor dude had actually been in love with this girl, in a sense, which is why he went to go seek to help her, anyways. And he found out about her situation, how she got involved in it, and it's basically that he was blackmailed into this situation, you know. So, what do we think about that part of the twist in the tale? What do you think about that blackmail?
Yeah.
Certainly as a part of the character, I would guess.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about the bevy of women that he seems that the Baron seems to take in and choose every night?
Huh. Well, the townspeople don't think much of it.
Like the one guy said, "Sir, you do not have daughters yet." But the one happened to look like his first wife, so that was kind of interesting. And then moving on to the torturous dungeon, which there's obviously a torturous dungeon.
Oh, obviously.
There has to be.
Yeah, you can't have a castle like that. It's built into the contract.
Yeah, a castle without a dungeon. That's like, an apartment without a bathroom.
Yeah, I know.
So, apparently, the reason why the doctor has been invited to this castle, in fact, it was invited on the behest of Mr. Sardonicus himself, because he himself tells Maud to use her charms or whatever ways necessary to get him to, cure him of his fatal disease or whatever is wrong with it, because he wants to find some way to get rid of that grimace. So what do we think about the ways and variations that the doctor goes through to come to his ultimate decision on how to cure him of his malady?
Well, it is kind of interesting, a little bit dubious, but kind of interesting that his technique that has won him so much praise seems fairly simple and holistic rather than medical, if that makes sense. But I did like the way that he ultimately kind of tricked the Baron with his treatment. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah, that was pretty interesting, I think. Then it means that it was always something of the mind. Which, ladies and gentlemen, if I didn't say it before, spoiler alert.
Yeah. What are those?
I have no idea. Where we everything that there is possible to ruin the movie. No, just kidding. No, we actually explain the movie and discuss it like gentlemen.
Yes.
So,
yes, exactly.
So we can decide whether we like it or don't like it, or what we think about each section or whatnot.
Right.
In any case, moving on to the overall effect of the movie, since I think that we have covered many of the characters, unless there is a character that you think we have not discussed.
Well, actually, there is one character worth discussing. It's probably my favorite one, but he was not actually part of the story. I was very, very, very amused by Mr. Castle's appearances in the film.
I agree. Mr. Castle is very much a part of the film. He does this very cool intro where he is like walking along London streets or something like that.
Right.
And he talks about ghouls and how they come out at night and shit like that. And he gives a very eerie incantation of what there is to expect. And then, of course, he also is very involved in the audience, where he would actually take these. If you were arrived at the theater and you watched Mr. Sardonicus at the theater, you would get these punishment sheets of paper handed to you at the door, and then wherever you sat, of course, if it was a William Castle theater, it came with buzzers and all that jazz if need be to scare you. But he was very much an entertainer in that aspect, where he wanted the audience more involved. So he would bring bring these posters of these punishment things, and he would actually come to these theaters and do this thing himself, or sometimes, depending upon the theater, of course. But he ultimately did that screen appearance where he would count people out, and it was effective. It was effective, and people loved going to William Castle's. They came out with more shit than they came in with. So,
do y'all know if they actually filmed alternate endings to this one, or I couldn't quite tell with the one I was looking at.
They might have filmed an alternate ending for this, but on the DVD, unfortunately, it just had the pause. And then
let's see. Same thing with the Blu-ray release that I had. Mill Creek, I believe, did the Blu-ray release.
And Mill Creek is going to be bare bones. But if they ever get picked up by something like Shout or Kino Lorber or something, then maybe they would track down whatever else there is.
And that Mr. Sardonicus at least gets a Criterion release.
That'd be nice
it could work.
If it ever could.
It'd be a good one. So basically, what they have here, just to expand on this a bit, Mr. Castle appears again toward the end and tells everyone, hey, do you want thumbs up? The Baron gets the message from Kroll and is cured, or thumbs down, he is punished. And so, of course, we see this lovely ending where Kroll decides to withhold information. For the first time, he decides to be disloyal. And then it's not a pleasant ending for the Baron.
Well, because it's not a pleasant ending for the Baron, and those who do not know the ending, too bad. For yourself. But what happens is he's shocked into his face being relaxed, and he ultimately has to continue with his mouth not being able to open.
Right.
So when Crowley comes back, he just eats in front of him.
Yeah.
Apparently, the Baron is unable to.
Because he was so relaxed.
What
but he
do
couldn't. Yeah,
what do we think about the special effects of the film?
The makeup was really good in it.
yeah,
As I said, it really, I know it had to have been inspired by The Man Who Laughed, just because that makeup was too similar.
Mhm.
So I was actually quite impressed by that. Of course, the makeup with Kroll, I believe it is, the just with the eye, that
Yeah,
was
right,
also really good. Just those
right.
subtle touches, including the setting of the castle, all
I
really cool stuff, in my opinion.
what do you? I mean, I understand that those were cool, but I thought that the moment that you actually saw his face the first time,
Yeah,
that that was that to me to this day still is frightening to look at. I mean, if you see it the first time, that grin,
it's not
Oh
pleasant.
yeah.
it's not
It's not.
exactly pleasant, and it gives you a sense of unease almost.
Yeah,
Well, as I said, Man Who Laughed. It had to have been taken from that. Um, that's a good thing. I mean, I'm not saying a bad thing. It's a good thing,
right.
because it is today considered one of the creepiest makeup jobs in horror, especially at that time.
Mhm.
Uh, and it looked very much. I mean, if you look that up in there, there's got to have been some sort of inspiration from it.
I would have to say so. It's been a while since I've seen The Man Who Laughs myself, but I would have to say that they might have taken some inspiration from that particular film. Uh,
But
and now you think, Jake, that this film took some inspiration from Nosferatu, correct?
Well,
Or
yeah, I think it probably did. Or maybe Nosferatu, but like I said, the actual story of Dracula, a lot of the story beats were very similar. Um, I wouldn't know for sure if Castle was pulling more from Nosferatu or from the actual book, but it definitely, a lot of the story beats reminded me of it. Definitely. There were some differences, obviously, some pretty big differences, but some similarities. Yeah.
so, what about the music? Um, do you think the music uh, went with the uh, plot? And uh, did you notice any music?
see, this is
I
where Katie and Dustin would be better off in this aspect.
I noticed it, but to be honest, I don't remember it very well.
Okay.
I do feel like it was good, like it was well used, but if I remember correctly, I feel like it was more kind of your typical for the time sort of, nothing that really jumped out as this is unique to this film, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But it was effective for the film. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So evidently, for the William Castle collection, it was put with Sony Pictures Home Entertainment, and then when it first came out, it came out with Columbia Pictures.
Mhm.
So definitely interesting. But I remember seeing it on VHS, and it was definitely a different VHS picture on the cover. Yeah, it had the Punisher on the cover, so just a marketing gag. But that's kind of what he was kind of known for, involving people in his productions. And yes, it was in fact William Castle Productions that was his production company name. So
I loved how he did that in 13 Ghosts, because that was a good example of Castle's involvement in his films.
Well, 13 Ghosts
Um,
entirely different production too. It was the first film that to me started the 3D generation. It had an aspect of that. It wasn't 3D per se. I think it was something else entirely, but it was something where you could actually have glasses at the theater.
yeah, I mean, it utilized the technology that allowed you to either one, you see the ghosts, which were in red,
Correct.
or not see them in blue, which was kind of cool that you had that choice in the films.
Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine what kind of experience. Like I said, these films really were an interactive experience in the theaters. I mean, that's one of the things that Dark Castle Productions was based on. I mean, it was called Dark Castle because they were redoing William Castle movies, like House on Haunted Hill, and being one of them, 13 Ghosts being another. I really wish that they had continued the trend. I would have loved to have seen what they would have done to Mr. Sardonicus.
I would have loved to see what they would have done to do with this production, or even if Tim Burton could have at this production.
It would be interesting.
But in any case, does anyone else have anything else to particularly add to this film?
Well, just a quick a follow up to what you were just saying. I think that was one of the things that amused me about Castle's moments on the camera. He reminded me a little bit of Burton, and they also probably some other folks as well, but particularly Burton, because he was so upbeat, so gleeful. He was talking about these really dreadful and macabre things, and he was doing it, and it was like he was like a kid in a candy store sort of thing. And one imagines that Tim Burton does feel the same way when he's making a film.
Well, just as equally creepy is the fact that Alfred Hitchcock would kind
Right.
of do the same thing.
Yeah, Alfred Hitchcock, definitely.
A slow monotone, and you wouldn't
Right.
know exactly what he's thinking. You know,
Right.
and so he'd be saying, just like that guy who's in Casper, who does the dry eye commercials. Dry eyes.
Oh, Ben Stein.
Einstein.
Bueller.
Well, actually, and yeah, Hitchcock did. I mean, he tended more toward the serious side, but one of my very favorite films he ever did was a film that honestly might be at home with these films from what I'm seeing, which was like just a gleefully macabre comedy, which was The Trouble with Harry. I just love that one, and I was like. That'd be a good one to cover one of these days.
We definitely need to cover at least one Hitchcock one of these days.
Right.
Because I don't even think we've covered one of his, any of his even most popular films. But who he reminds me of the most when it comes to that gleeful nature is Lloyd Kaufman.
Yeah.
I mean, when you see Lloyd Kaufman on screen talking about his film or in the film, especially if he's on film as Lloyd Kaufman, the energy level and excitement that you can see for his own work and for those that are participating in his work is palpable. It's just a very, very incredibly strong. So maybe that's part of what this is about.
What's interesting is remember when Maud Sardonicus was referencing that she had been reading the works of Mr. Conan Doyle.
Yes.
Apparently, she was referring to the writings of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. But now this movie is set in 1880. But the Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, was not published until 1886. So that was an interesting misinterpretation for their sake.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was. I mean, when you're trying to put a B movie together, you're not entirely thinking about facts, are you?
Well, it depends on the film. Some people try really hard, and then you get a film like the one we almost covered tonight, where anachronism was par for the course. You know. Yeah.
But I always thought hearing about this movie where a man just walked around with a smile upon his face is and it gives you an all too different idea of what a ghoul really is.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it really is one of the definitive pictures. Whenever you think of ghoul, you think of that or Lon Chaney, really.
Right.
But in the end, that's where it goes. I mean, before we start wrapping up with it, what about favorite scenes? I know we didn't cover that.
I have to think that my most favorite scene is when right down to the last moment where they shock Mr. Sardonicus into what state that he becomes in, and then he walks out and he's all silent, his mouth is unmoving, and then he walks down to the room and he writes on the wall, "Be gone." So, but I also get a kick out of Kroll. If the master asks me to do that thing, I do that thing.
Yes.
Well, I actually liked having the ending from the part where Castle comes on himself to the actual turnaround. It just, to me, it was an apt thing. And the fact that it reminds me a little bit of The Dark Tower, the way that ends, where really and truly you could either decide, you know what, I'm just going to turn it off here and say it ended. Or if you really want to keep going, you have your options.
Yeah. But whereas the true ending of The Dark Tower was kind of frustrating. This one was good.
Tower?
What's that?
Are you talking about the Stephen King Dark Tower?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's well. Yeah, this one gave a little bit more twisted satisfaction.
Yes, it definitely did that.
Definitely. And to me, this movie holds up. What about you guys?
Oh, definitely. And I do think I have to agree in terms of scenes. Definitely, that Kroll, giving his explanation of his work ethic was pretty awesome, and and that end. And then, the castle scenes, particularly the first one, that introduction was just like, just his, again, that infectious gleefulness that like, this is such a dark, and morbid and macabre story, and I love it. It's like, not exactly what he said, but that's what you get out of it.
It's
And
like
it's like,
it's like you have a Dean Martin trying to tell you a bedtime
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was pretty. What's that?
that turns into a nightmare.
Uh, well, and on that note of like something that's a little darker and macabre, one interesting little side note: Vladimir Sokolov, the one who played Henrik, who was the Baron's father. Of course, a big part of the plot hinges. We never actually really said how the plot hinges on his father. His father died a year after his mother, and he helps bury him. And there's this discussion with the gravedigger about ghouls and grave robbers and all this stuff.
Which that was an interesting segment too,
Right,
because
right.
the graveyard digger is kind of is part of the town or part of the village, and evidently this village is small. So because you don't really get to see too many people, but you get the assumption that this village has a village.
Right. So essentially, you have Henrik is this really nice, kind of kind-hearted person. He seems like he's not
He's the son of a
entirely there, but he's, he means well. And he's all excited. He tells Alenka, I have a present for you. I have a present for you. And then he finds his lotto ticket, and she just like, shoots him down right there, icy stare and whatnot. But it turns out that very night he dies and gets buried. And then they find out he had the winning lotto ticket. And it's in his pocket in the grave. And of course, Alenka doesn't think twice. She's like, dig him up. Get that money.
I don't dig him up. Go get our fortune.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But
what's in its pockets is
yes.
Nobody expects to see the freaking skeleton that's in there.
No,
even though he was
he
just
degraded fast.
Yeah, I was going to say that was some serious decomposition there. I was like, it must be having heat like we've been having the last couple days, but or worse.
Well,
but the side note I was going to mention is that Sokolov actually did pass away a year after the film came out, and he did have quite a few credits. Like he was working hard when this film came out. He had a lot of post credits, but yeah, I found that kind of interesting.
Well,
the film hinges on his death, and then he passed a year later.
And the illustrious Ilanka, she ultimately played Trudy in GI Blues,
Okay.
with Elvis, and didn't really. She was in Boris Karloff's Thriller in one episode.
Yeah, it looks like she mostly has TV credits.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah,
but it was interesting that she was in GI Blues before this.
Yeah, I only saw one Elvis movie and I was not impressed.
My fiance is into a lot of Elvis movies because her mother was. So I recently just saw GI Blues. I'm not entirely impressed with some of his films either.
Right.
Well,
I think
one
I saw was called. I think it was called Kiss the Girls. Not to be confused, of course, with the much better film from the late 90s. But,
Okay.
Actually, as a good end question to end cap the discussion, should you have been through the same situation where there was the $10 million Powerball ticket, was in your father's pocket. He meant it for you, but your wife was being a little bit petty and decided, you know what, heck with this stuff. We're just going to bury him with it. But then you found out that was the winning ticket. What would you do?
What would I do? Well, I'd probably just leave the damn thing there and go pour.
Yeah.
Doing that ahead of time, knowing exactly what happened here, I would have just left it there. Fuck him. That's his heaven ticket.
Yeah.
That's a
it's
hard
like-
one.
Yeah.
Because again, he wanted it for them at the end of the day.
Right. Well, it was their fault for not checking his pockets. It's like, didn't they ever watch The Princess Bride? You know, all dead. There's really only one thing you can do. What's that? Go through his pockets and look for loose change.
Well, Ilanka is also in House of the Damned, which I know I've got that film. So it's definitely interesting that she's still in some suspenseful film later on.
All right.
So,
Definitely.
on that note, I think we'll wrap this up here. So, unless anyone else has anything else to add to this, it seemed like it was very straightforward, even though it had an illustrious plot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was a fun little film. It was like I said, I was kind of pleasantly surprised. I actually enjoyed it. I tried watching. Brandon gave me lent me a 2-pack, another William Castle film, Homicidal, and that one was a little harder to get into. But it had its moments. But,
that one's some fun.
Yeah, it had its moments, like I said. But,
yeah, I mean, I went through and I watched. I actually did some pretty good research because I went ahead and I did the House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts and 13 Frightened Girls and Homicidal and The Man Who Laughed. So I was very prepared for this one.
yeah, unfortunately, I've only seen the remakes of The House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts. I need to get back and see the originals.
Well, the original is...
Did he do...
The original of House on Haunted Hill, I believe, is on YouTube if you wanted to check it out. So
actually, I think I have.
Did he do The Haunting?
The first one?
I can't. Yeah, did he do The Haunting?
No, that was Robert Wise.
Okay.
Robert Wise did a bunch of really creepy ones too. So
because the original Haunting was also really good.
Oh yeah, I agree. I agree, but for some reason, even though I know some people didn't like the remake of The Haunting, I actually like the remake of The Haunting better than I liked the first one. Although I think both have an atmosphere.
So this is interesting. I didn't realize William Castle was a producer on Rosemary's Baby.
Yep,
that's kind of cool.
He had some influence in that.
He was definitely a fan of that genre.
So yeah, I wanted to double check, but yeah, The House on Haunted Hill, I did recently acquire it. We talked about it on our pickups, I believe. The Vincent Price film, yes.
Oh yeah, you got that collection.
Yeah. So I look forward to that.
Okay.
All right.
Very cool. So, Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, we're going to be ending up our choice month with my birthday selection and also my Father's Day selection with one of my father's favorite films, the prestigious film Barfly. Of course, I'm sure that you've all heard of it. If not, well, actually, I'm not surprised.
Oh my
but that's more. but more the reason to tune in for next time.
Definitely. Now that's at the end of the month.
Yeah, that's the last one for the month, and hopefully, actually, I can almost guarantee it. By that time, we will have our first July pick voted on and decided.
That reminds me, Mr.
All right.
You have to give me the updated list of films for this month. I
I don't
know.
have one yet.
Well, once we vote and do that for the rest of them, then you'll have to give me a list so I can post
Oh,
it to our wall.
most definitely.
So, Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do?
Okay. Well, I'm Kotobuki Jake. I'm based here in Central Virginia, where I am an avid film and TV fan and collector and occasional reviewer. I do have a Criterion review for the Japanese film Death by Hanging that went up recently. I have several more in the wings, just need to find editing time, which is tricky to do. Uh, I frequently guest on Brandon's channel, Septum Sin versus the World, which is we have a very cool list coming out this week, the second part, or part one of the second part. I believe you're doing it the same way, half this week, half next week.
Correct.
Of a video of our anime influences. This being somewhat more the intermediate stage. I guess we did beginning, and now we're in the more intermediate stage. And I have my own channel, Kotobuki Jake, on YouTube, which is also is just dedicated to nature and the natural world, and gets very sporadically updated. But there's some stuff there, and that'll do for now. There you go.
That's
And
all,
I
folks.
don't think Brandon, you actually finished your thought. So go hand it back to you.
Oh, well, of course, I'm Septum Sen versus the World. We are a YouTube channel dedicated to movies, video games, and pretty much all things physical media. So if you like physical media of one sort or another, of course, tune us in. We have various things like top 10 lists, as we discussed, video pickups, stuff on new DVDs and Blu-ray releases, as well as a new feature I'm adding for a little while called Video Game Diaries, in order to celebrate our entry into the Rebel Gaming Club. So we are doing various things on our channel. We have fun. Of course, I hope that you would join us. And I do encourage each and every one of you listeners, once we get the list up, you will get the option to help us decide which of the movies we will cover in July. So look for that very shortly.
Awesome. And my name is David Striggy. I run Inside Movies Galore as well as host along with everyone here. So thank you for listening. I'll definitely be getting back into some reviews. I've just been in interview mode lately. This week I've had 2 interviews. One I had with Ricardo Islas, which I went down to his casting call and filmed it, recorded the interview right then and there, exactly where it was. So that went out Sunday evening, and then today I had an interview with Kevin Lindenmuth, which if you haven't checked that interview out, it's out and up, and it's ready for listening. So check the page out, Inside Movies Galore. You can find it on Facebook. And check back regularly on my Delusions of Grandeur page for reviews from time to time. Kick back, watch some movies, and have some fun. So the movie for next week is a mystery for right now, till we figure out voting wise exactly what it is. So stay
Well,
tuned.
next week we know.
Oh, next week we know. What is it?
Yes. Barfly.
Oh, I thought it. Oh, okay. So it's the last one of this month.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. So next week. Okay. Gotcha. So I will find where I digitalized my copy of Barfly and send it out to people. So, which I should have that somewhere. But in any case, everyone say good night.
Good night.
All right.
And don't go looking around in graveyards trying to steal lottery tickets.
I keep
No.
doing that all the time. I just gotta
Going-
stop.
Yeah. Not a good hobby.